This story is dedicated to Cynthia Carlin from the United States, one of the voices that keeps this channel alive. You remind us why we tell these stories, to show that real strength isn't in muscle, but in control. This mission's for you. Let's begin. They called her fragile, claimed the recoil alone would shatter her frame, said she didn't have the muscle to handle real strain. Then, right there on the mat, they popped her shoulder out on purpose. They figured she'd fold, give in, maybe even break down. But Lieutenant Commander Hadley Moore didn't move an inch. She gritted through it, grabbed her own arm and snapped it back into place bare-handed before walking off without a word. And when the rematch came, she returned the favor, dislocated his shoulder, then another's, then left again in silence. Because Navy SEALs don't quit when bones fail, they adjust. Now, before we roll, the moment she deliberately popped her own shoulder out just to escape faster than anyone ever had, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Hit that like button if you're locked in for this mission, and make sure you're subscribed with the bell on, because this isn't a story about pain. It's about what you turn pain into. The sun hit the asphalt early at Falcon Bay Training Facility that morning. Not warm, but sharp. The kind of light that made every flaw, every crease, every imperfection stand out like weakness. Lieutenant Commander Hadley Moore stood outside the operations wing, adjusting her harness with slow, exact precision. Her frame looked too slight for the gear, like a gust could knock her over if it caught the straps just right. One shoulder sat a little lower than the other, even under the tactical jacket. Look twice and it became obvious. Small, slim, quieter than the rest. Maybe she's medical, someone whispered from the line near the tower. Nah, looks admin. One trigger pull and she'll snap in half. The laughter wasn't loud, just enough to bounce off concrete so she'd hear it. Hadley didn't react, didn't even glance their way. She tightened the last strap, clicked it into place, and walked toward the staging pad like she was checking a box, not answering a taunt. Then came the voice that didn't bother hiding behind a whisper. Careful not to hand her a rifle. Boys, Gunnery Sergeant Cole Draven called from the far edge of formation. Might blow her clean off the deck. He stood there, with arms folded, 6'1", the kind of frame that made his sleeves fight for space around his biceps. Draven was the type who loved leg day almost as much as he loved being loud before sunrise. He wore that grin like a badge, the look of a man who believed 18 years enlisted, 4 deployments, and a lifelong dislike of what he called paper seals gave him the right to mock anyone he wanted. The line chuckled with him, a few Marines even nodding. Hadley Moore walked past in silence, boots whispering over the steel ramp. A clipboard waited on a metal case near the ladder, and she picked it up like she didn't feel 30 pairs of eyes dragging over her every move. Overseeing the drills, Lieutenant Aaron Cade glanced up once and gave a quiet nod. She returned it, posture centered. Spine aligned, hands perfectly still. It didn't match the insults, it was too controlled, too deliberate, like she'd already weighed the noise and filed it under irrelevant. Draven kept his grin, but the air around her had shifted. When Cade called the squad to attention, Hadley didn't blend back into formation. She stepped forward instead. Today's evaluation begins now, Cade said, but for many watching, it had already begun the moment the light caught the tight line of her shoulder, and she didn't move an inch. The afternoon drills always carried that sharp mix of bleach and adrenaline. The CQD pit, close quarters defense, wasn't built for glory. Just a square of padded mats behind chain-link fencing, one buzzing light overhead, and a low hum of bodies trying to prove who owned the floor. Lieutenant Commander Hadley Moore stood barefoot at the edge, stretching carefully, mindful not to irritate the joint still stiff from last week's endurance climb. It clicked faintly with every rotation. Healing wasn't the same as recovered. Across from her, Gunnery Sergeant Cole Draven rolled his sleeves, jaw locked tight. "Ready for a real lesson today, ma'am?" "Always," she said evenly. He turned to the recruits lined along the fence. "Let's see if bones can teach muscle anything." A few nervous laughs followed. Above them, Commander Trent Lawson gave the signal. "Demonstrate the standard leverage lock sequence. Begin." Draven moved first, quick for his size, snatching her wrist and pivoting his weight to pin her elbow against his chest. Textbook move. But he didn't stop there. He twisted harder, pushing past the safe limit. The sound that followed was soft but unmistakable. A deep, muffled pop. Her body jolted once. The shoulder slipped clean out of place, leaving a hollow dent where it belonged. Gasps rippled through the pit. Draven let go immediately, feigning shock, palms up. "Protocol tap out. Damn, didn't mean to. Guess you're more delicate than you look." His voice carried across the stunned silence. A few recruits laughed uncertainly, unsure if they should. Hadley stood motionless, face pale but steady. Not fear, focus. Her right arm hung limp at the elbow. Without flinching, she reached across with her left hand, gripped her wrist, inhaled once, and pulled. The wet crack of bone sliding back into socket echoed louder than the first pop. The room froze. She exhaled. Once. "Resume drill." Commander Trent Lawson's voice cracked through the mic. "Session suspended. Medical check. Now." Hadley Moore turned her head, flexing her fingers once. "No need, sir. It's stable." "That's an order, Lieutenant Commander." The medic jogged over, field kit in hand, eyes wide. "You shouldn't. I'm aware," she cut him off. "Protocol requires confirmation." He followed as she walked out, still muttering to himself. In the infirmary, the air buzzed with antiseptic and the low hum of machines. The medic slid a portable X-ray pad under her shoulder, the screen glowing with clean images. No fracture, just soft tissue strain, maybe a micro-tear. "Good," he said. "You should ice it." "I'll adapt." She took the stylus, signed the waiver, and slid the clipboard back. When she stood, her back remained straight, movements slower, sure, but not weaker. Out in the hallway, the same recruits who'd seen her shoulder pop turned their heads as she passed. None said a word. Cole Draven leaned against the far wall, smirking like he expected someone to join in, but no one met his eyes. When Hadley walked by, silent and unshaken, it wasn't pity trailing behind her. It was disbelief. By dusk, the mess hall had become a hive of half-truths. Metal trays clattered, spoons scraped, and over the dull roar of tired voices, one name carried through every corner. More. She didn't even scream. Didn't cry either, just popped it back in like nothing. The tone wavered between awe and unease. The laughter that followed wasn't confidence. It was nerves. At the far table, Gunnery Sergeant Cole Draven leaned back in his chair, tray empty, ego full. "You're all exaggerating. Wasn't even a full pop. She's light, folded wrong. I barely twisted." A few Marines chuckled out of reflex. "She's tough," one muttered. Draven's smirk widened. "Tough? Please. She's a paper seal. A strong gust could pull her apart." But one Marine stayed quiet, Corporal Dean Harker. He'd seen the angle, the torque, the way Draven's grip had gone from demonstration to something else. He said nothing, but silence carried its own weight. Across the hall, Hadley Moore sat alone, posture straight, spoon circling through cold oatmeal she hadn't tasted in minutes. The mess carried sound too well. If you stayed quiet, you could hear everything. She didn't look up, didn't react, just folded a napkin's corner, slow and steady, and kept eating. Near the drink line, 3 SEAL candidates stood in a loose triangle, voices low. One of them, Petty Officer Riley Voss, had trained under Moore 2 rotations ago. "You know what unit she was with before this?" he whispered. The other 2 leaned closer. DevGru Task Unit Raptor. She was on the team that pulled 6 hostages out of Kandahar back in 2019. The firefight had dragged on for 11 relentless hours. She'd taken shrapnel to the shoulder and never stopped moving. One of the others frowned. "That's not confirmed." Riley Voss didn't flinch. "I've seen the scar. And I've seen what happens when someone mistakes her for just another instructor." The third candidate flicked his gaze toward the far table where Cole Draven still held court. "You think she'll let this slide?" Voss gave a short, dry laugh. "She already hasn't. They just don't realize it yet." The group fell silent as 2 Marines passed by. When their boots faded down the hall, Voss added quietly, "Draven thinks he broke her arm. What he really did was give her a reason to redefine the standard." Back at Draven's table, the atmosphere was shifting. One of the younger Marines, Private Logan Sykes, leaned forward. "Gunny, that wrist lock you used, wasn't that the one banned after the Tampa incident?" Draven's jaw tightened. "It's a standard leverage sequence. Standard doesn't twist past 90 degrees, Corporal Dean Harker said under his breath. Draven's head snapped toward him. "You questioning my technique?" "No, Gunny." Harker stood, lifted his tray, and walked off. Sykes followed. Draven sat alone, still wearing that smug grin, but now the table around him was empty. Later, in the barracks, Hadley Moore's bunk was a picture of order. Blanket folded to regulation. Field log open beside her pillow. She rolled her shoulders slowly, feeling the dull ache pulse down to her forearm. It didn't feel like weakness. It felt like calibration. Wrapping an elastic band around her wrist, she began slow, steady rotations. 20 reps, then 20 more. Each pull tested a limit. Each cycle mapped a boundary she planned to erase tomorrow. When the pain peaked, her focus drifted, memory rising unbidden. Afghanistan, Kandahar province, the tunnel collapse, dust thick enough to choke the air. One arm pinned beneath concrete, the other holding a flashlight she couldn't afford to drop. 11 hours before extraction. No morphine, no witnesses, just breath and command. Her voice had stayed steady then. It would stay steady now. Across the barracks, laughter rippled again, the same voices from before. She ignored them, eyes on her tablet as she opened the next day's operation brief. Escape and evasion, E&E practical. Hangar Bay, 14, 0700 hours. Objective, free yourself from restraints without tools. A test of adaptability, precision, and patience. Everything Draven dismissed as weakness. Her gaze lingered on one line in the mission notes, use of pain tolerance not recommended. She smiled faintly, pulled a pen from her pocket and wrote a line in the margin of her training log, neat, deliberate. Adaptation begins with loss of symmetry. Then she capped the pen, rolled her shoulder once more, and let the ache fall into rhythm with her breathing. Outside, the floodlights across Falcon Bay Training Facility clicked off one by one. Inside that silence, she wasn't recovering. She was preparing. She was preparing. The sun had just cleared the rooftops when Hangar Bay 14 thundered awake. Steel shutters rose like theater curtains, revealing rows of cable spools, sandbags, and modular wall panels set up for the day's drill. The air smelled of rubber and worn rope, controlled chaos, the essence of training. 40 candidates stood in loose formation, wrists behind their backs, as instructors moved down the line with thick, reinforced cable ties. Each strip clicked and locked with mechanical precision. The rules were simple and cruel. No blades, no brute tearing. Get loose before your ligaments give out. No improvisation unless it works, barked Commander Trent Lawson from the catwalk above. You escape using leverage, angles, bone placement, not muscle. The chatter died instantly. Adrenaline filled the void. Gunnery Sergeant Cole Draven stood mid-line, chest out, flexing his forearms like he was already proving something. His ties had been cinched tighter than anyone else's, by his request. He turned to his squad with a grin that reeked of arrogance. "Some of us have leverage," he said, "some don't." Across the bay, Lieutenant Commander Hadley Moore knelt in a corner stall. Her wrists were bound just as tight, but her posture was calm, folded into stillness like it was meditation, not captivity. A few Marines chuckled when the stopwatch lifted. 3, 2, go. Noise erupted instantly. Grunts, teeth grinding, plastic straining under muscle. Some recruits yanked with all their strength, twisting shoulders and wrenching elbows to find purchase. But Hadley didn't move. Not yet. She stayed perfectly still, head low, breathing slow. Then, with surgical precision, she rotated her right shoulder forward, fraction by fraction, until her scapula slipped. The dislocation came not with a pop, but a click. Her fingers relaxed, tension loosening just enough to give her space. She rolled her elbow inward, slid her knuckles beneath her spine, and drew her hand through the narrow gap her own pain had created. Her left hand came free, then her right. 18 seconds. At first, no one noticed. Then someone whispered, "She's out." Heads snapped her way. Hadley stood, rolling her shoulder back against a concrete post. One soft pop as it reset. A flicker of pain crossed her face, but only for a breath. She raised both arms, neutral. Commander Lawson leaned over the railing. "Check the time." 18 seconds. Someone confirmed. Verified. Silence swept the bay. On the far side, Cole Draven was still pulling, face red, muscles straining, wrists rubbed raw and pink. Someone muttered, "She did it on purpose, dislocated it to escape." Lawson scribbled a note into his pad, eyes locked on her. Draven didn't look up. He couldn't. He was still fighting plastic while across the bay the woman he mocked stood free, calm, steady, breathing like it was just another training day. The ties bit deeper into his skin, carving red rings that darkened toward blood. He grunted through clenched teeth, arms trembling with every failed jerk. The more Cole Draven struggled, the tighter the restraint bit into his skin. "Just fold your thumbs under," one of his Marines whispered. "I am," he hissed back. "This plastic's defective. Or maybe the problem's not the plastic," someone muttered quietly. Across the bay, Hadley Moore stood by the instructor's table, rolling her shoulder against the edge of a steel post with slow, deliberate pressure. Her jacket sleeve was pushed up, revealing the faint outline of a compression wrap beneath. The arm still moved, barely, but it moved. 18 seconds. Commander Trent Lawson murmured again, almost to himself. He wasn't praising her, and he wasn't doubting her either. He was recalibrating what he thought was possible. Draven finally stopped pulling. His wrists looked as if someone had tried to saw through them with dull wire. Sweat ran down his temple. One of his own recruits glanced at Hadley, then back at him. "She's already out, Gunny." "She cheated," Draven snapped, standing taller, as if posture could rewrite the truth. "That's not protocol. She dislocated her shoulder to get free." That's not leverage, that's self-harm. Lawson didn't even blink. Negative. Verified technique. No tools, no rule violations. In the corner, the SEAL candidates whispered among themselves, the words filtering through the still air. Intentional dislocation, escape reflex, controlled trauma. None of them sounded like insults anymore. They sounded like awe or warning. Driven's jaw clenched as the realization sank in. She'd done to him exactly what he'd done to her, only cleaner. She'd taken the pain and turned it into a weapon. Hadley walked past him slowly, silent until she was right beside him. She didn't stop, but her voice cut through the space easily. Force isn't strength. It's waste when it's misused. Driven's jaw twitched. You think that trick wins fights? She turned her head slightly, her tone steady. No. Discipline does. Then she kept walking. No smirk, no triumph, just quiet control, like she no longer needed to prove anything. Then show me, he shouted after her, voice cracking somewhere between anger and challenge. The words hung heavy in the bay like a dropped weapon. Before Hadley could answer, Commander Lawson leaned forward from the catwalk, his tone flat and official. Reflex test, 1900 hours. Moore, Draven, authorized. He repeated it, crisp and final. Reflex test, 1900 hours. Moore, Draven, authorized. The bay went silent. Draven blinked, his own challenge sealed and thrown back at him. Signed, scheduled, recorded. One of the SEALs whispered to another, "This isn't a rematch. It's a correction." And for the first time that day, not a single person laughed. The rest of the afternoon crawled like thick syrup. Cole Draven tried to keep his usual swagger in the equipment bay, rewrapping his knuckles for the third time. One of his Marines hovered nearby, though the air between them felt different now. "She's got one working shoulder," he muttered to no one in particular. "Maybe 1.5. Physics still applies." Corporal Dean Harker leaned against the wire cage. Physics also applied this morning when she slipped out of those ties in 18 seconds. Draven's hands froze mid-wrap. That was a parlor trick. Was it? Private Logan Sykes asked softly. Draven turned sharply. "You got something to say?" Sykes stared at his boots. "Just, Gunny, if Commander Lawson reviews the footage—" "There's nothing to review," Draven snapped. "It was clean contact. She's fragile. That's not my fault." But his tone wavered, the kind of edge that comes when someone starts doubting their own story. Harker pushed off the cage. "We'll be in the gallery watching." Draven met his eyes. "Good. You'll see what real pressure looks like." When they left, he stood alone in the echo of the bay, staring at his taped hands. The clock read 1847. 13 minutes. He cracked his neck, rolled his shoulders, told himself he was ready. But somewhere under the bravado, a small voice whispered the one thing he didn't want to think. She reset her own shoulder without flinching. What else doesn't make her flinch? He shut the thought down, grabbed his gloves, and headed for the reflex chamber. Everyone remembered the last time she entered with a dislocated shoulder. This time, she'd walk in with precision sharpened by pain. And nobody, least of all Draven, was sure who'd walk out the same. The rehab wing sat almost empty by 1840 hours. Just the hum of HVAC and the faint squeak of rubber soles on polished linoleum. No radio, no voices. Just the kind of silence built for focus. Lieutenant Commander Hadley Moore stood alone beneath a flickering ceiling light, the bulb pulsing every 7th second. Her uniform jacket was folded neatly on a bench. Her right arm, bound tight in reinforced compression, hung motionless at her side. Not a twitch, barefoot, centered, balanced. In front of her stood a padded wall and two stripped-down aluminum training dummies. One bore a taped X where the neck met the collarbone. The other carried a sandbag across its midsection, a target for leg work. She exhaled once, then moved. Left foot pivot, elbow drive, hip hinge, drop, rise, reset. Every motion was exact, no wasted energy, no excess noise. She didn't grunt, didn't strain, but sweat gathered behind her temples. The brace didn't shift. The bad arm stayed still. Always. She turned toward the mirror bolted to the corner pillar and paused. Her reflection showed a left side now fluid, dominant, something that hadn't existed weeks ago. That wasn't luck, that was intent. Flashback, week 6 of Bud S. The Pacific cold biting deep. Her right hand too swollen to close into a fist. An instructor crouched beside her, voice cutting through the surf in pain. "Your body doesn't decide what works," he said. "Command does. Comfort doesn't matter. Clarity does." Back in the present, Hadley Moore murmured it softly, not as motivation but as recalibration. Clarity does. She stepped forward again, left leg sweep, shin trap, reverse stance. Turning her back to the second dummy, she let her body weight drag it silently to the mat. Then she reset everything, the dummy, the mat, her footing, by hand, deliberate and exact. Crossing back to the bench, she opened her field log. 2 entries already filled the page. Beneath them, she wrote another. Reflex demonstration. Time, 2100. Format, controlled correction. Limits, none. She set the pen down just as a long metallic clack echoed through the facility, the reflex bay doors unlocking. Hadley rolled her sleeve down over the compression wrap, zipped her jacket to regulation height, and stepped into the red-lit corridor. No hesitation. No backward glance. The next movement wouldn't be adjustment, it would be correction. The reflex chamber wasn't made for spectacle. Just a 30-foot square of padded floor and slanted walls, red safety lights humming from recessed strips around the edges. No mirrors, no soundtrack, just a design meant to strip away comfort, expose habits, and test instincts when everything else failed. At 1858 hours, Gunnery Sergeant Cole Draven entered through the far door, fists taped, shoulders squared. He'd shaved for the occasion, not for regulation but for pride. He rolled his neck, cracked his knuckles, and nodded at the observers watching from the gallery above. 1 round's all I'll need. 2 levels up, Commander Trent Lawson didn't respond. He just tapped the timestamp into his tablet and waited. The inner door opened again. Lieutenant Commander Hadley Moore stepped through, wrapped in the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. No gloves, tactical boots, the faint outline of a compression sleeve peeked from beneath her left cuff. Her right shoulder remained lightly braced but visible. She moved to the center mat as if gravity simply didn't hold the same pull on her. Lawson keyed the mic. Controlled contact, no sustained holds. Stop upon neutralization, begin on my mark. Draven rolled his shoulders, smirking. You sure that shoulder's ready? Hadley didn't answer. Begin. Draven lunged first, fast, heavy steps, trying to box her against the left wall and hook her shoulder the same way he had before. But she dropped low, pivoted, and redirected his weight like water cutting through stone. His momentum carried him over her shoulder. His full bulk hit the mat hard. Pop. The sound was clear, sharp, unmistakable. He rolled away, clutching his right shoulder, eyes wide. Alpha neutralized, Lawson said evenly through the mic. The gallery was silent. Draven pushed up, breath hissing. That was a slip. Didn't reset footing, round 2. This time, he came slower, measured, cautious, but too late. Hadley met him at center, caught his forearm mid-swing, rotated with her hips, and redirected all his force into a clean spiral torque. His elbow gave before he even processed the movement. He dropped to one knee, groaning, arm clutched tight. Beta neutralized. Moore stepped back, shoulders steady, face calm. Correction complete. Draven stayed down, gasping, one knee up, his good arm locked around the injured one. No one in the gallery spoke. Hadley turned to Lawson. "Further contact unnecessary." "Agreed," he replied. "Drill complete." Medics hurried in, and Draven didn't resist. Hadley Moore walked off the mat without a backward glance, each step as deliberate as her entrance. Her right arm still bound, still injured, but far from useless. Above, Lawson logged 2 final notes. Moore, neutralizations confirmed. No violations. Draven, injury due to resisted correction. Down on the floor, no one called it a rematch anymore. The entire base understood what they'd just witnessed. It wasn't revenge, it was reversal. And the only sound left in the reflex chamber was the shallow breath of a man who'd believed brute force could win, and had just learned what happens when discipline answers instead. In the gallery above, no one moved for several long seconds. Commander Trent Lawson stood frozen. Stylus paused mid-stroke over his tablet. The 3 SEAL candidates who'd been whispering earlier now stood in total silence. Petty Officer Riley Voss finally exhaled. 18 seconds to escape, 2 rounds to correct. She didn't even use the bad arm. "Didn't need to," one of the others murmured. Below, the medics eased Cole Draven to his feet. He wasn't protesting now, wasn't making excuses, just nodding faintly while they checked his elbow, his face pale and drawn. At the gallery rail, Corporal Dean Harker gripped the metal so tight his knuckles whitened. He'd seen every detail, how Draven's aggression had turned on itself twice. "She didn't hurt him," Harker said quietly. "She let him hurt himself." Private Logan Sykes stood beside him. "You think he'll report her?" Harker shook his head. "For what? Responding to his challenge and using his momentum? She didn't break protocol, she broke his assumptions." Lawson shut his tablet with a soft click. Galleries closed, everyone out. They filed out wordlessly. No laughter, no whispers, only the rhythm of boots on steel steps. Outside the chamber, the story was already spreading. Not through reports, but through whispers that outran orders. She walked in with one arm, took him down twice without using it, didn't even break a sweat. By the time medics wheeled Draven toward the infirmary, 3 junior instructors were already rewriting the next day's training protocols. Not because anyone told them to, but because they'd seen what happens when you mistake restraint for weakness. None of them wanted to become the next correction. The conference room the next morning felt colder, not from the air conditioning, though it droned overhead, but from the weight of consequence hanging in the air. Polished floor, frosted glass. 4 chairs on one side, 2 on the other. A single folder centered on the table, untouched. Commander Trent Lawson stood at the head, sleeves rolled, one palm flat on the surface. "This isn't a reprimand hearing," he said evenly. "It's a procedural review." Across from him, Gunnery Sergeant Cole Draven sat with his right arm in a rigid sling, skin beneath the gauze already purpled. His jaw was tight, his eyes hollow, not defiant, just aware. 2 Marine witnesses sat beside him in silence, not daring to look up. On the opposite side, Lieutenant Commander Hadley Moore stood at attention, hands clasped neatly behind her back. Her uniform was sharp, posture flawless, the black brace on her shoulder still visible, yet her stance had never looked stronger. Lawson opened the folder and read aloud. Medical confirms dislocation to Moore's shoulder during initial CQD drill resulted from non-regulation torque, exceeding protocol safety guidelines. Cole Draven opened his mouth, then shut it again. Commander Trent Lawson continued evenly. Medical also confirms no complaint was filed. No injury report submitted by the injured party. Instead, a request was logged. Scheduled demonstration, reflex chamber. Timestamp, 1900 hours. He looked up from the folder. That correct, Lieutenant Commander? Hadley Moore nodded once. Yes, sir. You could have pressed charges. I could have, she replied calmly. But pain doesn't need punishment. It needs context. Lawson paused, flipping the page. Second injury. Gunnery Sergeant Draven's shoulder dislocation and partial ligament strain occurred during a controlled simulation. Verified by all observers. No protocol violations. His gaze shifted to Draven. You initiated both contacts. The difference was who maintained control. Draven didn't argue. His eyes dropped to his own bruised, swollen fingers inside the sling. Lieutenant Commander Moore, Lawson said, your conduct demonstrated exceptional control under duress and tactical adaptation while impaired. This command views your response not as retaliation, but as corrective demonstration. Hadley gave a single nod. Understood, sir. Lawson turned to Draven. You're off rotation until cleared by medical. A formal note will be added to your record. Instructor conduct lapse under review. You'll remain in your position, but this base no longer recognizes your discretion in joint drill selection. Draven didn't contest it. He simply nodded, the words hitting harder than any demotion could. Lawson closed the folder. Case closed, training directive recalibrated. Hadley stepped back, offering a precise incline of her head. No smile, no reaction. As she turned to leave, Draven finally looked up. You made your point. She paused in the doorway, her voice even. No, I made yours visible. Then she walked out, leaving behind silence, paperwork, and one more correction. Not just of protocol, but of perception. Her shoulder torn, her spine straight, she remained utterly unmoved. The corridor outside command stretched long and clean, polished concrete under faded yellow lights. A place built for transitions, not moments. But that morning, it carried a different weight. Lieutenant Commander Hadley Moore exited the tribunal the same way she'd entered. Shoulders squared, gaze steady. The black brace on her right arm stayed fastened, but her stride was unhindered. No one waited outside, yet eyes followed. Conversations along the hall faded as she passed. A young SEAL candidate, barely 20, boots too clean, whispered under his breath, "That's her, the one who broke the breaker." Word had already spread. Not as rumor, as fact. It traveled faster than memos ever could. On a bench beyond the admin wing, Cole Draven sat hunched forward, arm in its sling, fingers twitching absently at the cast's edge. He didn't look like a predator anymore. He looked like someone running numbers in his head, counting consequences instead of reps. He didn't look up until she was beside him. "You made your point," he said quietly. She slowed for only a moment. "No," she said quietly, "I made yours visible." Then she kept walking. Behind her, Cole Draven dropped his head into his hands. At the security checkpoint leading to the drill yards, Commander Trent Lawson leaned against the steel frame of the open doorway, arms folded. He didn't speak at first, just watched her cross the hallway in silence. "You made quite the impression," he finally said. Hadley Moore paused just before passing him. "Didn't intend to." "I know," Lawson replied. "That's what made it effective." His eyes drifted down the hall toward Draven, still seated and hollow. Base feels different today. She nodded faintly. That's what happens when noise meets precision. Lawson gave a quiet exhale, half a laugh, half respect. You just made the case for a new standard, you know. Hadley didn't smile. Not interested in setting standards? He raised a brow. Then what are you interested in? Adjusting the strap on her brace, she answered simply, eyes steady. Correcting what others leave broken. Then she stepped through the checkpoint into the sunlight beyond. Outside, the compound looked unchanged, sunlight glinting off gravel, tan walls, antennas slicing through blue sky. But those who once whispered or laughed now stood a little taller. Not because of who she was, but because of what she'd proven. That when strength is quiet and precision is earned, even the loudest rooms fall silent. Would you keep going if someone dislocated your shoulder mid-mission? Do you think precision hits harder than strength when everyone's watching? Drop your answers in the comments. I read every single one. If this story reminded you what real control looks like, hit that like button. Subscribe with the bell icon so you never miss the next mission. And share this video with someone who still thinks pain means weakness. Our next operation's already on your screen. Go watch it now. I'll see you in the next one, here on Major Tom's Tales.